I guess we're going to start. So you probably all know who I am. My name is Diana Scialla, and I want to thank you for letting me talk about one of my favorite subjects. So here we go, okay? So we're going to talk about Oplontis, which is a ruin in southern Italy. Oplontis was discovered in 1964 by an archaeologist by the name of Alfonso de Franciscis. When he started digging, he was amazed at the size of the villa. It's a maritime villa. It was on the sea. Now, Oplontis, its modern name is Torre Annunziata. It's situated, let me make sure I've got, whoop. So it's situated between Herculaneum and Pompeii. And it was also buried under 28 feet of pyroclastic material by Vesuvius. Like I said, De Franciscis was amazed because the villa was different than other villas that had been unearthed in the past. It housed some of the most amazing second-style frescoes that had been found. And it also was kind of a mystery because they didn't quite know who owned the villa. I've been to this villa numerous times. In fact, every single time I go to Naples, I end up visiting the villa. It's mesmerizing, and it is kind of mysterious, not only for the frescoes, but also because of who might have owned it. And we'll get into that in just a minute. But first, let's go back and just talk about, for those of you who are not that familiar with this area. So it all starts with this. This is Mount Vesuvius, one of the most dangerous volcanoes on Europe proper. In 79 AD, probably in the fall, Vesuvius erupted with what is known as a Plinian eruption. That is one of the most dangerous eruptions that you can have. We had one in America with Mount St. Helens. When it erupted, it shot gas, molten rock, you name it, up into the atmosphere about 30 miles. Now, the first day of the eruption, Pompeii was bombarded with lapilli, which are small pumice stones, ash, large projectiles. But the other towns, like Herculaneum and Oplontis, weren't that affected until the night of the eruption. On the night, volcanologists think that around midnight, the eruption cloud, which remember was 30 feet up in the, or 30 miles, I'm sorry, up in the atmosphere, collapsed under its own weight. When that happened, it came barreling down Vesuvius, down the side, about 800 degrees Fahrenheit and 200 miles an hour. It completely buried Herculaneum, they think, in probably 3 minutes or less, under between 60 and 90 feet of pyroclastic material. Oplontis was a little bit luckier, and it was buried under 28 feet of pyroclastic material. But both towns completely disappeared. So let's look at this villa, and I can kind of show you with my handy dandy pointer here. So this is the villa of Oplontis. It used to be on the sea. It's not on the sea anymore because Vesuvius dumped pyroclastic material out like half a mile. But this is the older section of the villa right here. This is the north garden right here. So the villa faces north-south. This is the newer section. So this was put up about 50 BC. This section, the eastern section, was put up 100 years later. And if you're looking at this floor plan, you might be thinking, well, it looks a little lopsided. We've got like the older section, we've got this new section here. Is there anything in the west? And you'd be correct. There is something in the western section right here, but it's underneath a modern day road. And then over here is a police academy or a military academy. So they've been unable to dig there. However, last year when I was there, they told me that they're starting to dig underneath the road, which is very exciting. I offered to bring my pickaxe and they declined, but I am very intrigued to see what they find underneath the road and then on into the other side. I'm not quite sure if they have access to where the police academy is or not, but that is very exciting. So here is the north garden. You can see right here, this is 28 feet of pyroclastic flow right here. So this is what De Franchicis and his team had to start digging out. And this is, right here is the atrium of the villa. So this is the oldest section right here. The new section is over here. And see this building right here and this right here, that's the police academy that they're going to have to start tunneling this way. So let's start looking at the older section. This is the atrium of the villa, put up about 50 BC. This atrium, or an atrium, was the most important part of an elite person's home. This was the area that you brought people in, you brought your business associates, political affiliates, family, friends, you name it. This was the area that they came into and you built this to impress. This particular atrium is the largest that they have found in the Campania region. So that is Pompeii, Herculaneum, Stabii. This is the largest atrium. So this starts to give you an indication that some bigwig owned this villa. Now this is one of the frescoes on the wall of the atrium. And this is a second style fresco, which I'll explain more in detail in a minute. But if you look at these things right here, this is a detail of that. These are called, I'm not going to pronounce it in Latin, they're called clipped images. So what they are paintings of ancestors of whoever owned this villa. Just like we would put photographs in our living rooms or whatever of our relatives, this is what this person did in the villa or had painted in the villa. So we don't know who these people are, but these are ancient ancestors of this person. This is my favorite room. This is the triclinium. This is a dining room. Triclinium in Latin means 3 couches. They would have arranged the 3 couches around this little mosaic carpet right here. So, like I said, these are second style frescoes. And they're the best frescoes that you can find in the Campania region. The Romans had 4 styles of frescoes: first style, second style, third style, fourth style. They didn't all happen all at once. They happened because of what was happening in Rome. First style frescoes were anywhere between 200 BC and about 80 BC. Second style, which is what this is, started occurring about 80 BC and sorry. Started occurring about 80 BC to about 30 BC when the Emperor Augustus took power. Second style is my favorite style. It's very Baroque. It is realistic, and yet they use a lot of fantastic imagery. They use perspective. They use a lot of nature scenes. They usually have a main focal point, like this right here, and they use a lot of marble. Now, why is marble important? Well, you have to start thinking in terms of what was going on in Rome at the time. So when this particular style was put up, you had some of Rome's most grandiose movers and shakers in the Roman world. You had Sulla, you had Marius, you had Julius Caesar, Gnaeus Pompey, Crassus, Cicero, Mark Antony, and all of them were vying for power, but they said they weren't. So if you wanted to be someone who impressed people, you would use certain things to impress people, like on your walls. But the worst thing that you could be accused of in Rome at that time was to be a king or a dictator. Kings have palaces. In their palaces, they would use marble. You were not allowed, it was taboo, socially taboo in Rome at the time for you to use marble in your house. You could donate marble and give it to a public building, but you would not use it in your own home. That was strictly taboo. So what's the next best thing? Well, you have someone paint your walls with not just any marbles, but some of the most expensive marbles that, so that everyone would know that you had great taste. Now, these columns right here are Antico Giallo marble, which is very expensive. In fact, Antico Giallo marble now is extinct. So you have columns here, there's a column there, another expensive column. This is another Antico Giallo column. This is this lovely little bird right here. They use a lot of nature in these paintings. There are over 500 birds represented in this villa. So they absolutely love nature. You could see here again with this column, the Antico Giallo column. Here is another room. This is another sitting room where they would entertain, and you see again this beautiful peacock. This is a temple to Apollo in this center section right here with a tripod. You can see on the other side, they've used perspective really well on this side right here. Expensive columns right here. So when archaeologists started studying these rooms, they started to notice that there were similarities between this villa and some of the other villas in the area. Especially there's a villa in Bosco Reale called, it was owned by a man named Publius Fannius Sinister. They started to see a lot of similarities, and I've actually, I think, seen similarities between this villa and also the Villa dei Misteri in Pompeii. And they came up with the idea that there was one workshop that probably painted not only these frescoes here, but also the frescoes in Bosco Reale. And because there were similar motifs, similar ways of using paint And so they came up with the nickname, the Bosco Reale Workshop. These guys were masters of their craft, and they used very expensive paints. That's one thing they used in several of the villas. And what they would do, you can see, like here, you kind of have like a silvery blue cast to this wall. They would wash the wall beforehand or paint the wall beforehand with Egyptian blue. Now, Egyptian blue was a very expensive paint. It was made out of copper and ash, and you had to heat it for days on end. That's one color that they used that was very expensive. The other one is this red, which is cinnabar red, which is absolutely dangerous to use. It's mercury sulfide, but they used it on the walls. Now you can see here, like with this silver urn, where they've used like a blue wash over this, so it gives it kind of that silvery, soft, bluish tint. They also burnished all their walls. They polished them with marble dust. Here you can see again with the blue. And this is a torch underneath. And this beautiful peacock with its tail draping over the edge. This particular thing I have photographed I don't know how many times. Every single time I go back, I am just so fascinated with it because it's like the original still life. And you've got this lovely silk scarf draped around it to keep the wasps out. But it just fascinates me that to paint something that beautiful. Here is the first cheesecake ever painted. It's some sort of cake, but it looks like a cheesecake. So you can see the different, it's very strange. It's not anything that we would, in modern painting, that we would do, but they put all these motifs together and somehow it works. There again, you see up in the corner there's a basket of figs. So again, another original still life, but look at how well they've done the glass. So you can tell that these guys were really masters at their craft. This is kind of fascinating. So there are areas in the villa that the paint has fallen off, but it gives you an understanding of how these guys worked, because the master craftsman would come in and his assistant would put a cartoon over this and dot it out, and then they would etch the design into the plaster. And of course, these are frescoes, so you only painted as much as you could with the wet paint. It wasn't like it was done all at once. You really kind of had to know what you were doing. Now, this is an interesting area of the villa. I wanted to point this out because there's two trains of thought here. This is one of the areas where the slaves would have lived and worked, and there are some archaeologists that think that this is painted marble, which I don't think so, or it's supposed to look like marble. Other archaeologists, and I'm very much in agreement, think that these areas were used to indicate to the slaves that this was an area for them, it was okay to be in. So this is one peristyle where they did work, but you've got other areas here, like this hallway, where you can kind of see this zebra stripe again on the wall here. This was a sitting room. So you have to remember, too, it wasn't just the slaves in the villa that were moving around the villa. This was a huge villa. this owner, whoever he was, probably had tons of guests. Those guests would bring their slaves. How is that poor slave going to know where he can go and where he can't go? And so it could be just another way to indicate to slaves, this is the route that you need to take to get to the other side or whatever. I have seen this also in some other villas, so I think that's probably why they used it. Okay, so now let's go back and look at the east side of the villa. The east side is completely different than the old side. So the east side has nothing but entertainment rooms right here. And it also has this massive swimming pool right here. So all of these rooms face out onto the swimming pool. I asked Scott, I don't think Scott's here today, from the building ops department. I asked him if he would find something in the museum that would correlate to the size of this swimming pool. And dear Scott came up with the southeast atrium. So this swimming pool is the same size as the southeast atrium, including the family restrooms. So this is a massive swimming pool. So this section of the villa is, like I said, completely different. And the architect or architects that worked on this side, which was 100 years later, so around the time of Nero and the Emperor Claudius, so one of the techniques that they used was a technique called enfilade. Now, enfilade, to put it simply, is something like this. Whoops. If I'm standing here in this room in the south, the way the architect has designed it, with the windows and the doorways in all of this section, they're slightly off axis. And what that does is that I could be standing in the south, I'm looking through the doorways and the windows all the way to the north side. It gives a sense that the villa just goes on forever. Those rooms just go on forever. I've seen this technique done once to perfection, and that was in a villa in Rome that's also buried. And when you're down there, it's called the Domisaria. When you're down in that villa, you can look through almost through, I'd say, probably a good 20 rooms, and it almost makes you panic because it's like, oh my God, this just goes on forever. The villa in Rome was owned by, not that, this guy, the Emperor Nero. So this kind of gives us a hint as to who might have owned this villa. Now you could see I'm standing in one room, and there's if you look into the next room, there is a painting, and then if you're standing a little bit off this way, you could see into some of the other rooms. This section also has a lot of interior gardens, and the architects have also used things like semicircles and octagons, octagonal rooms, skylights. And so you can basically see into the next room. Here's one of those round rooms where, and there's an interior garden. Now, I said before that when 100 years before this, that it was taboo for Romans to use marble in their houses. Well, it's not true during this time of Nero. This section is loaded with marble. There are marble floors, there's marble-clad walls, there's also a marble colonnade, which no other villa has a marble colonnade down there except for this one. So whoever owned this villa had a ton of money to be able to afford to load up this section with as much marble as they did. Now, there's another aspect that ties Nero into this villa, and that is this lady. Her name is Poppea Sabina. She was Nero's second wife. And Poppea's family came from the town of Pompeii, and the family also had holdings in Herculaneum as well. Poppea is, actually, no. So when De Franciscis was digging up the villa in 1964, he came upon an amphora, which is a stone jar for oil or for wine. And on the lip of that jar, it said, Secundus Poppea, which translates to Secundus, slave of Poppea. To De Franciscis, that meant that Poppea or Poppea's family probably owned the villa. And he and other archaeologists since then have nicknamed this villa the Villa de Poppea. Nero and Poppea met when they were both married. But she very much wanted to be the Empress of Rome. And so she became his mistress. And then eventually Nero did away with his first wife. He had her executed, which was very unfortunate. But and he married Poppea in 62 AD. So that said, there are several different accounts about Poppea that were written by two historians. One is Tacitus and the other one is Josephus. They both said that Poppea was highly intelligent. She was well-read. She was highly educated and very headstrong, very beautiful. But she also had a fascination with Jewish mysticism. In fact, both authors mentioned that Poppea would invite Jewish scholars and mystics to her home to discuss Jewish philosophy. So around 2010, a graduate student was looking at the different graffiti in Oplontis, and he found a very interesting graffiti, which is this one right here. And what made it interesting was that it wasn't written in Greek. It was written in Aramaic, which is the language of the Jewish people at the time. So he's written a paper that said this also kind of ties into the fact that Poppea could have owned this villa. So I went and photographed this about 2016, and unfortunately, since that time, it's been blocked off, so you can't see it. So, and I'm not sure if anyone has translated it completely, but that is another hint that perhaps Poppea and Nero owned the villa. Now, both Poppea and Nero had very unhappy lives after they married. Nero and Poppea lived in Rome, but Poppea died in about 65 AD of a miscarriage or some sort of problem in pregnancy, and Nero was devastated. Nero committed suicide in 68 AD because the Senate no longer supported him, and they more or less told him he needed to commit suicide. The villa itself was kind of semi-disabled in 62 AD. There was a major earthquake in Pompeii and Herculaneum and Oplontis, which kind of messed up the aqueduct there, and so there were no more pool parties after that. There was no water, and the villa, it kind of seems like it was more or less like put to rest or just had caretakers there. And then, of course, in 79, it was buried under 28 feet of pyroclastic flow and didn't show up again until 1964. So on that note, until they start digging in the West Wing, this is about all that we really have right now, but it'll be interesting to see what they do find in the West Wing. So thank you very much for your attention.
Plenty of time for questions.
All right, being a former lifeguard looking at that pool, that would be a large pool even today.
Yeah.
I was wondering, how could they possibly fill it up? So it was connected directly to the aqueduct?
Yeah, but there's also, and I'm not sure how they would do it, but there's also, historians have talked about certain pools being filled up with seawater. So remember, this villa was right on the coast there. So there could have been a way, I'm not sure how. It could have been seawater, or later on it probably was filled by the aqueduct. It's only, I would say, 3 feet deep all the way.
That's still impressive for the time.
Yeah, I know.
And also,
yeah.
Wondering, was the pool heated or not?
I don't think so. And then I was reading, because there's steps in the south end, and so they were talking about its slopes towards the south, so that means they drained it.
You'd have to clean it. So let me tell you what happens if you don't. It's not pretty.
Yeah, but you know, if you have an army of slaves, I guess that doesn't matter. But obviously, once the earthquake happened in '62, they didn't have to worry about that. But ironically, the pool that we see today is actually smaller than the original pool. The original pool was actually bumped out to the north and to the south, so it was even larger. So, but what I always think, well, how many people did you have swimming? Or, why did you need, but, maybe it was also for just decor, because there were statues around and trees. It was very beautiful, I'm sure.
Can you talk a little bit about the condition of this place after it was excavated, and what kind of restoration work has occurred since then? Because the colors are pretty amazing, and I just wonder if how they got that way.
Well, so when they started digging it up, I think frescoes, for the most part, if they're buried, they're pretty fresh and until they start hitting the surface, and then they get between the the frost and the rain and everything else, then they start fading. I mean, some of the ones in Pompeii, but of course they were dug up in 1738, 1740. So when De Franciscis and his team started excavating, they were pretty fresh. Now, a lot of them had caved in, you know, because of the pyroclastic flow and everything else. So they had to restore pieces of some of those rooms. They had flipped over, like broken and flipped over, and so they had to replace them. They're still, as far as I know, they still have like fragments in certain areas, and it's like a big jigsaw puzzle trying to figure out where this went and where that went. And I didn't have a picture, but I think it's the atrium. It's really amazing because, you know, those rooms had shutters, and now they have like pyroclastic flow that is kind of in the shape of the shutters, where it just like came in and just disintegrated the wood, but the shutter, the material is still there. So it's so it was. It was fortunate that it was dug up in 1964 instead of the 1700s, because their techniques were a lot better. They decided to leave the frescoes in situ instead of taking them out, which was wonderful. And they do a pretty good job. I mean, it's still, I've been there in the winter and just watched the rain come down, but the frescoes are still pretty tough there, and the colors are just vivid. They're just beautiful.
Are the frescoes, do they have a coating, a preservative coating on them now?
No, they don't want to do that, because there have been some nightmare techniques in the past where they've done things like put beeswax on them. And then the problem is the salts come up when it rains. It comes up through the fresco. It's sealed in there, and then it starts cracking this way. And so I think they have decided that less is better, and they just cover them up, make sure the sun isn't on them, you know. So and until they come up with some perfect solution, I think that is the best way. So.
Is this villa run by the state or by Packard, as in Herculaneum?
No, this one is associated with Pompeii and Stabii, so it's under the aegis of the Naples Archaeological Consortium or whatever.
Other questions? Is that style of fresco where you have, you know, the paintings and the motifs, is that pretty common for these villas that were owned by wealthy?
Yes, because like I said, this was one way of impressing people, is to have, but to see these second style, you don't see that many second style frescoes, because those were done about 50 BC. You see a lot well, that brings up a good point, Paula, because this villa was 100 years later. They never painted over those second style frescoes. They kept them kind of like we would keep antiques. So whoever owned the villa was like, no, we're not touching that. In other villas, they would repaint over second style because it was considered passé. But here, for whatever reason, the villa owner opted to keep those old frescoes. So, and we don't know about the Villa dei Papiri because it's still buried. So I'm not quite sure about frescoes there. And the Fanius Sinister, the Publius Fanius Sinister, those frescoes got taken out of Bosco Reale, and I believe they're in the Metropolitan Museum in New York. But if you Google that and you look at that style, it's very similar to what you see in this villa. And then the Villa dei Misteri, there's certain rooms that are similar. So it was probably that Bosco Reale workshop.
When was the last time you visited? When's the next time you're going back? And when you go, do you go with an agenda, or do you just go and discover what you discover?
So that depends on the year. So I go back almost every year. This I kind of skipped it this winter because of the Jubilee, because I'm very spoiled. I don't like to be there with other people. So, but I will go back next year. And a lot of times I do go back with an agenda, depending on, you know, I'm constantly reading different people's writings and reports or whatever. And if they, like this person that turned this up, the minute I read that, it was like, oh, I've got to go back and see that, which thank God I did, because like now I said, you can't see it. So, yeah, I do go back with an agenda a lot of times, so I'll definitely go back in January, probably, with my pickaxe. Like,
How did you get an interest in all this, Diane?
My grandmother would say I brought it with me, so when I was like 4 years old, we had those golden book encyclopedias, and there was a Julius Caesar on the front, and I was like, man, that is just fascinating, you know, the statue of Julius Caesar. It's been with me for a long time. And then about 2001, my dad's family lives down there, and so in 2001. We went back, but my main agenda was not to see the family. Hopefully they don't see this if it's taped. But anyway, they had opened the Naples Museum. They had kept it closed for so many years, and they opened it in 2000, and I was like, oh my God, this is like, I've got to see this. And I've been in love with that museum ever since, so.
Other questions? Yeah, well, we're recording. Sorry, I don't let you shout because we're recording this.
You'll bust someone's eardrums there.
Were there a lot of statuary and artifacts and stuff taken out of this villa and put in a museum somewhere?
There were some, so in '62, it was partially destroyed. And so that's why they think that there were caretakers there who took some of the statuary out and like put it in the garage or whatever. You know, they were just they took stuff from the swimming pool and things like that and put it in storage, I guess thinking that eventually somebody would do something with the villa. So, they are starting to put the statues back out, and I was just in the British Museum a couple weeks ago, and I don't know if you know about William Hamilton. You know, he was the diplomat for England, and he took a ton of stuff out of Naples, and we were in the British Museum, and I'm looking, and William Hamilton had taken out some things from Oplontis. So apparently, and this is an interesting point because the people who lived around there probably knew that there was a villa underneath. You know, the locals probably knew and did a little bit of digging or whatever, but this was like it was a bronze something or other, like a footstool or something, and I'm like, how did he get that out of Oplontis? But somebody must have sold it to him. But The other interesting point, there was a botanist, her name was Wilhelmina Yashemsky, and she did a lot of work in Pompeii and also in Oplontis, and this woman was amazing. She would go in and put plaster in the holes where the trees and the plants and everything were so that she could figure out the root, and then she could identify what plants they had planted there. So now they're starting to replant that area how it would have looked under Nero or Poppea or whomever. So they're, slowly they're getting it together, which is, I think it's just tremendous. It's great that people take that time to do that.
Nerdy scholars. Are there other questions? Let's thank Diane for the fascinating talk.
Thank you.